takes it to 2.5, just a 1 point margin. And you know what, Aman? Liam Lei has already proven our prediction model wrong, which gave him a 1.5 points in the 5+1 section. Says wait and watch.
Yeah, exactly. The 1% was coming from basically only scoring 1.5 points in each section. So 2.5 already exceeding expectations, horrid AI expectations. But what we can say is that Quang Liem has 2.5, and he could easily have 3.5, 4.5 points, depending on how some of those results went. Can't be thinking too much in hindsight, but I will say just having the types of games where he could be even scoring better, and to have 2.5 points on the board, only being down 1 at the moment, it's a good spot to be in. And this was the strong start to the blitz that we were talking about in the pre-show.
And the reason for that is we were discussing it so much that going into those shorter time controls, Liam has to make sure that Hikaru isn't running away with a big margin. He needs to stay within the 1 point distance to have a real shot, a real chance when we go into those shorter time formats. Because if it gets the bullet, that is Hikaru's kingdom, right? That's his safety net. He'll be looking at that as something where he just puts the finishing blow, or even if by chance he's behind in the match, he's trailing, he'll look at his comeback in that bullet portion.
Yep, exactly right. A lot of upsets or underdogs think, let me try to just keep it even, or maybe be slightly down going into the bullet. Anything can happen. But against Hikaru, you almost have to have the opposite. You probably need to perform in the blitz portion, because Hikaru is one of those top players that actually has bullet as an incredible skill set to go along with his blitz prowess.
And I think the storyline that we're seeing developing here with Liam having these better positions out of the opening, so much of it also comes from Liam being this fundamentally classical player who's had most of his practice in over-the-board chess. He relies so much on opening preparation as well as deep calculation. So I think this 5+1 and 3+1, huge segments for Liam. And so far, I have to say, has been impressive. His control on the clock and also the kind of positions that he's been getting.
Yep, certainly has so far. And I do expect Hikaru to naturally just gain a little bit more of an advantage every time the clock, the time control gets shorter. So the 5 minute I expect to be Quang Liem's best segment, and he's certainly playing like it so far. Knight to h4 to f5 in this position, always difficult to remove this knight on f5. Like, it's such an annoying piece. The first thing that you just have to think about is, what happens if knight e4? But even if you would lose the knight on f5, you can throw in a sneaky desperado knight takes on h6. But Tanya, that knight on f5 is really annoying.
Especially when you don't have that light square. Bishop has been traded off. That becomes even more powerful. Moves like g6 to kick it out, never possible because h6 is weak. Right now, black gets his own threat in, stopped by g3, because white's pawn structure on the king side a lot more flexible.
Yeah, and I think c takes d3. I mean, you can take back with the rook and just maintain control, but Hikaru sees the opportunity, perhaps in the future, you don't need to rush, for just pawn to d4. And then eventually, if that pawn takes, you can play f4, and you kind of have this nice blockade on the queenside pawn. So I feel like with f3, he's kind of setting up the idea in the future of playing d4.
And he also created a really nice retreating square for the bishop on f2. I think you're on point. We might see d4 happen sooner rather than later. But right now, Liam really nicely first drove the bishop away and then brings the knight back to get rid of that very strong piece.
I wonder, I was going to say about bishop b6, whether you want to trade that dark square bishop off the board or not. We see knight f8 to go to e6, and it's a similar idea of just everyone knows that d4 is the target. This knight is even going to b4 to hit c6, but maybe to drop back to c2. d4 is the square that everyone wants to control here.
And then you're also trying to provoke c5 so that you get hold of the d5 square. So knight a2, knight b4, quite a nice maneuver there being set up. And if black was to push c5 preemptively, the knight just jumps straight back, attacking b5 and going over to d5. I'm still liking black's position because d3 feels like a big weakness in this.
Yeah, the d3 pawn it's kind of like this pseudo weakness. By definition, it is just a backwards pawn. And if black plays c5, it will really be held down. But the pawn chain here just is so important to actually maintain the integrity, not to push any of these pawns. And because Hikaru knows that, he also knows he'll probably be able to play d4 at some point this game.
He needs to make sure he gets that in. Right now, the knight finds itself on a nice c5 square. Almost feels like a little bit of a progress there by Hikaru as he lines up against the c6 pawn. I think it's a fight between who gets to d3 first, or will it be Hikaru to c6 first?
Yep, and rook c1, we see giving up maybe on this d4 idea for now, and instead clamping on the c5 square. Bishop takes, because I think the knight wants to come to e6, so it's got me wondering, do we have time for f6? Queen c2, though, you're going to have to do something awkward. Maybe rook d6, rook b5. What happens there?
With the queen pinned on c2, and Hikaru spots your idea, which is why Liem needs to go for the counter offense. Rook takes pawn. He wants to come in with his own queen, threatening d3 right now.
Yep. Yeah, and the king has a nice square on f7, so any type of endgame where you trade queens and go to pin this knight, the king just steps aside, and I think going into this endgame that the knight is going to be a more dangerous piece than this bishop, so that's probably why Hikaru is saying, no, hang on a sec, let's not go right into that endgame just yet.
He needs to keep the mages on the board, and that's because all the pawns on the left flank are on the light square, so you don't have targets if you're Hikaru in that endgame. So he does instead defend d3. Well, f4 would be the move that you want to get in, but that would create so many weaknesses around White's king.
Yeah, I almost wonder about queen e2 now that I see h5. Maybe with the idea of f4, with the extra idea of queen takes h5. If knight e6 gets played, then you can take on c6, because you don't have time for queen takes d3. So there's this little tactic here, which is keeping the knight on the f8 square, and you really don't want to go to g6. So I thought maybe queen e2, but instead, a calm bishop e3.
But these are the moves that are so difficult to handle, right? Because they just keep the tension on the board as is. You want to play knight e6, but not possible. So you end up making a less than ideal move. You place a rook on a less active file. But for now, he keeps c6 defended, and perhaps knight e6 in the air, f4 arrives.
Yeah, finally we see this f4 push. Queen e2, to me, is an important move. You have to take with the bishop, which I think is not ideal. You might want to take with that pawn if your queen was already on e2, but we're seeing a lot of squares being controlled here by Quang Liem, and if you take on c6, there was going to be a lot of checks in that position.
And the position is completely transformed. The pawn formation, totally different. 3 pawn islands for white. The d pawn can start going up the board. Queen f2, keeping it close to the white king. Knight g6 coming in with a big threat. Sidestepped. Knight takes pawn was the idea.
Yeah, and queen f3, which looks like a natural move, would have made knight takes h4 absolutely game winning. So not falling into that one, but using the same idea, pushing c5 and saying you cannot take this because of the threats of knight takes f4, knight takes h4. What is Hikaru going to do? Because the feeling is that Quang has kind of wrangled a little bit of an initiative over the last series of moves.
And that's what he felt, right? You want to make a move like f4, but that could weaken white's king. And that's exactly how this is played out. The white queen is now overloaded to stay close to the king to keep things defended, which gives a free hand to Liem on the left flank. Opening up, Hikaru feeling the pressure.
Exactly. The center is being undermined here. The knight is just performing better than the bishop. The bishop's trying to control all the squares the knight wants to move to, but it's so easy to just attack the bishop. It has to move away. You're grabbing the c-pawn with maybe the rook here even. I love the knight versus the bishop in the endgame.
And the knight is not only a great attacker, but a fantastic defender to its own king as well. Just making sure that there are no big checks. There's no mate when you've got a knight right next to your king. Queen takes pawn. Well, 2 of them currently attacked. Is he going to go queen f3, trying to activate to come to that f2 square?
Yeah, queen f3 is a nice way to kind of get, I guess maybe just going for a draw could be the problem with that, is Quang is maybe thinking about more. And hang on, queen d3 here looks like an amazing move. Potentially missed because I think you have to take this. What else can you do? The bishop is hanging. That's a mistake.
A huge mistake. The queen was spinning the knight, so you couldn't move it away anymore. And look at that, deflecting the bishop. Bishop takes knight d2 and the white king is too far away. Otherwise, black's king just comes forward, the knight assisting the pawn. King e1, king f5, king e4.
Yeah, so you want to play king f5 here. You're going to drop the g7 pawn. It feels like the right idea, but I can understand why he's holding back here. This is a very, very tricky position. I wonder if the idea is is really to play d2 to keep bringing the king in. This is very tough to navigate, but I think you have to really commit here with king f5. No, he goes back to f7.
He's playing it safe. He just wants to push the g-pawn, and then he's saying Hikaru has no moves. I have all the time in the world to do that exact same idea, but make sure the g-pawn remains alive. Now king f5, d2, deflect the white king. He goes the other way.
Yeah, at this point, the knight it can do anything it wants, right? You can attack the g-pawn at will. You can bring the king to b3. This should be a win. It will be very disappointing for Lei Quang not to win this game.
Now he's got to do it knight f3, a big fork in the air. With Quang Liem with 15 seconds on the clock, can he convert this big advantage that he has? Gives a check.
d2. Usually you don't want to play d2. I don't like that move. You want to be on the light squares here. And Hikaru, his resilience is amazing to watch.
It again pays off because Liam just doesn't have enough time on the clock. But it's still a difficult hold. Now he's threatening to take on d2, and he does. The pawn's off the board.
Yeah, you're really not supposed to win this with white ever. The thing is, your king is kind of locked away on b1. So if black just moves the knight around, there isn't anything you can realistically do. But be careful not to allow knight d2. Oh my goodness.
Whoa.
Look at this.
Oh my goodness.
He's going for the win.
Unbelievable. And he is about to win because the a-pawns are unstoppable now. The knight falls back, but the bishop comes back, and black's king is the one that's offside, and Hikaru Nakamura does it again.